It's the most wonderful time of the year. Now those words, especially in that rhythm, sound a little bit like the song, might remind you of Christmas time. Might remind you of the holiday season. Might remind you of being in Walmart in mid-November or right after Halloween and the Christmas decorations are already for sale. And it might remind you of a time that's a little more simpler than the time we're in right now. Because even this past Christmas was a much, much simpler time. It's the most wonderful time of the year. Those were the words that Todd's girlfriend was thinking as they rode into his hometown of Cumberland, Maryland. He brought her to his hometown Thanksgiving week to show her the town and to go to his high school's homecoming football game. And she was amazed. Everything was red and white. Almost every home had red and white decorations. The mailboxes were decorated. The yards were decorated. There were red and white lights everywhere. The homes had decorations. Businesses had red and white. Everything was wonderful. It looked so Christmassy. She told him, she said, Todd, I'm so impressed at the zeal and enthusiasm with which your hometown celebrates Christmas. And before I tell you what Todd's reply was, let me tell you just a little bit about Cumberland, Maryland. It's kind of tucked into the corner. Maryland, kind of, if you're looking at a map, the left side, the west side of Maryland kind of is like a wedge, almost like a panhandle like Florida, but maybe much smaller. And Cumberland, Maryland is just a couple of miles away from the West Virginia state line, and it's less than 10 miles away from the Pennsylvania state line. So it's just kind of nestled in between two states. It's a beautiful area, kind of mountainous. It's not far from Camp David, where the president flies to, the president's retreat. That gives you an idea. It's kind of up in the mountains. It's a good place. Now, Cumberland's also in the top 10 or 15 in America in two different categories. And I'll tell you one of them right now. The poorest communities in America. Cumberland's had a tough economy for decades. Businesses closed many years ago, and times are tough, and they have been for a while. But that didn't stop the people of Cumberland from making the town look red and white. And so when she said, I'm so impressed with the way your town celebrates Christmas, Todd's response was, well, wait till you see the other side of town. Because when they crossed the midway point of town, everything was still decorated. The mailboxes were decorated, the yards were decorated, the homes were decorated, the businesses were decorated, except it didn't look Christmassy because everything was blue and white. Everything was blue and white because it was not only homecoming game for Todd's high school, Fort Hill High School, they were playing against the other local team, Allegheny, and it's their homecoming too, the same game. Cumberland, Maryland's about the size of maybe Jasper or Hamilton, to give you an idea how big Cumberland is. But homecoming, that's all they call it, homecoming, because both schools, it's homecoming. They average over 10 to 12,000 people when those two teams get together. People mean business. They mean business with their yards and the way businesses are decorated, and you don't have any doubt where anybody stands in that community, because whatever they own is either red and white or it's blue and white on homecoming. Isn't it amazing when we are really enthused about something? Don't we want the world to know it? Yeah. And when we really dislike something, a lot of times we want the world to know that too, don't we? It's fascinating that we see some of both in the first two stops of Jesus' earthly ministry. If you turn to the 4th chapter of Luke, and while you're turning, I'll give you the background. Jesus had been baptized in the River Jordan by John the Baptist. And he was baptized to begin his ministry. The Spirit of God descended on him, and God's voice was heard saying, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased." Then Jesus went into the wilderness for 40 days and fasted. And at the end of that time, he was tempted by Satan, and of course withstood the temptations. And that's where we pick up the account of what happened. So we're in the 4th chapter of Luke, beginning with the 14th verse. Jesus returned to Galilee in the power of the Spirit, and news about him spread through the whole countryside. He was teaching in their synagogues, and everyone praised him. Now we know four things immediately. One, he went to Galilee because he was led by the Spirit. Secondly, news about him spread immediately. Now people weren't taking selfies with him or Instagram photos or emailing or texting or anything else. It took time for word to get out, but it spread quickly. The countryside knew quickly, and it said the whole countryside. Jesus made quite the impact. The third thing we know about him is what he did to create that impact. He was teaching in the synagogues. And the fourth thing, everyone praised him. Jesus' teachings were extremely well received. So he taught, it was well received, and word spread in the countryside. So chapter 1 of Jesus' ministry was off to a great start. How could it get even better? Well, now he's going to go to another place, but it's a place with which he is intimately familiar, his hometown. And let's see how he's received there. Verse 16. He went to Nazareth, where he had been brought up, and on the Sabbath day he went into the synagogue, as was his custom. He stood up to read, and the scroll of the prophet Isaiah was handed to him. Okay, now let's stop there. So far, so good. The same thing that happened in Galilee, where he was well received, word spread quickly, and he was appreciated by everyone. And now we get to his appearance in Nazareth at the synagogue with a scroll of the prophet Isaiah being handed to him. In the middle of verse 17, unrolling it, he found the place where it is written. Now we're at verse 18. The Spirit of the Lord is on me, because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, to set the oppressed free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. Then he rolled up the scroll, gave it back to the attendant, and sat down. The eyes of everyone in the synagogue were fastened on him. He began by saying to them, "Today this scripture is fulfilled in your hearing." All spoke well of him and were amazed at the gracious words that came from his lips. "Isn't this Joseph's son?" they asked. Jesus said to them, "Surely you will quote this proverb to me, 'Physician, heal yourself.' And you will tell me, 'Do here in your hometown what we have heard you did in Capernaum.' Truly I tell you," he continued, "no prophet is accepted in his hometown. I assure you, there were many widows in Israel in Elijah's time, when the sky was shut for 3.5 years, and there was a severe famine throughout the land. Yet Elijah was not sent to any of them, but to a widow in Zarephath in the region of Sidon. And there were many in Israel with leprosy in the time of Elisha the prophet, yet not one of them was cleansed, only Naaman the Syrian." All the people in the synagogue were furious when they heard this. They got up, drove him out of the town, and took him to the brow of the hill on which the town was built, in order to throw him off the cliff. But he walked right through the crowd and went on his way. Now maybe it's just me, but did you all notice a difference in the way he was received in Nazareth compared to the way he was received in Galilee? In Galilee, word spread quickly. In Galilee, they listened attentively to his teachings. In Galilee, they appreciated and revered him. Then he gets to his hometown, and they listened okay right before they tried to throw him off a cliff. Amazing, isn't it? The difference in the way that Jesus was received by some people and the way he was received by other people. People appreciated his teachings, and the people in Nazareth had no use for Jesus at all. Have you ever had things you really don't have any use for, but you kind of keep them around anyway? Do you ever have one of those drawers, like a sock drawer, where you kind of put the stuff that may not have a place? Or a drawer in the kitchen where you put the stuff? Or maybe some places in the garage, or one of those plastic tubs from Walmart where you just kind of stick the stuff that you don't really have much use for, but you don't really want to throw away because maybe as soon as you throw it away, you're going to need it. Or maybe somebody gave it to you and you want to still kind of have it so you can say you have it. Are there things that just aren't that important that you just stick somewhere? There've been a lot of heads nodding in the last couple of minutes because most of us have places like that or have to figure out where to put things that we don't have much use for. When the people of Nazareth didn't have much use for Jesus, they wanted to put him off the edge of a cliff. Do we have any places in our lives where Jesus is not welcome? Could it be a certain behavior or a certain attitude or certain people we have an attitude or an addiction or something we don't do that we should do? There's so many different things it could be. But the question is there an area where Jesus is not welcome? Now, there could be different reasons why he was not welcomed by the people of Nazareth. One of them was the people in the synagogue were not the people he said he had come to minister to. He said, the Spirit, in verse 18, the Spirit of the Lord is on me because he has anointed me to, and then he says what he was anointed to do, proclaim the good news to the poor. Now, the synagogue might not have been filled with the poor people. Freedom for the prisoners. Well, the prisoners sure weren't there because they're prisoners. And recovery of sight for the blind, to set the oppressed free. Jesus told them he had come to minister to people who might not have fit in with the folks there at the synagogue. And then the general principle that prophets are not accepted in their hometown. And Jesus didn't just say that. He gave them two examples from God's holy word. He gave them the example of Elijah, where God sent him to the widow outside of his homeland. And then Elijah's successor prophet, Elisha, with a similar name, how God sent him elsewhere. Jesus was not accepted. He was absolutely rejected. He was not wanted there. So that begs the question, is there anywhere in our lives where he has not been wanted? Where we've just maybe kind of said, Lord, in this area, I'll sit on the throne. You can sit on the throne in other areas of my life, but I can handle this one. If there are areas like that, what do we do about it? He's either God or he's not. He's either king or he's not. He's either ruler of our lives or he's not. Question and the challenge today, and hopefully the prayer, Lord, is there an area where you have been unwelcome in my life? We don't have to throw Jesus off a cliff or try to throw Jesus off a cliff to make him unwelcome. We can do that in the silence of our own hearts. It's amazing, isn't it? Those people in Cumberland, Maryland, made it abundantly clear where they stood on homecoming week in their town. You knew who was for Fort Hill, the red and white, and you knew who was for Allegheny, the blue and white. There was no question. If people had decorated 80% of their yard one color, but then maybe their mailbox or something else the other color, it would look kind of silly, wouldn't it? Who does that? It'd be like having Alabama or Auburn. It'd be like having most of your car decorated with stuff for one team, but maybe a bumper sticker in your tag being for the other team. It would look silly, wouldn't it? Do we treat Jesus like that? Is he only welcome in certain areas? It's really a simple message. My prayer for myself and for each of you today is that God be the sovereign ruler of our entire life. If you've not asked his forgiveness and his grace and his salvation, there's no better day than today to do it. If you've already done that, but if any of us are excluding him from any part of our life, there is also no better day than today to welcome him as our ruler. Will you pray with me? Lord, thank you for creating us in your image. Thank you for creating our lives and our families in this world, in our culture, in our society, in our nation, in our home, and our families. Please help us to fully acknowledge you as our master and creator in all areas of our lives. In Jesus' name.